Kailan ka huling tumingin sa salamin na may ngiting nababakas sa iyong mukha? Naalala mo bang mga araw na di ka nangangamba para sa iyong pamilya? Kanya-kanya tayo ng pinagdaanan. Ang lahat ay pagod, ang lahat ay takot. Hanggang kailan tayo magtitiis? Magbubulag-bulagan hanggang kailan? Di kaya ito na ang hudyat upang tayo ay kumilos. Lunod na ang ating bayan sa tindi ng mga unos. Bumangon na tayo, bumangon na tayo. Bagong umaga, naharapin bagong pag-asa. Nasa atin ay gigising tayong lahat. Ang siyang makikilabang sa ating pagbangon, sa ating pag-ahon. Bagong umaga na inaabangan, bagong pag-asa para sa ating bayan o Pilipinas. Handa ka na ba o Pilipinas? Handa ka na ba kay Lenny?
Tinanong ng bata sa mga kawal kung bakit walang sino mang nagtatanggol sa Pilipinas. Nagalit ang kanyang mga kuya at sinabi sa kanya na alagaan ang mga tupa. Ngunit alam ng bata na ipagtatanggol ng Panginoon ang Pilipinas.
Kanya-kanya tayo ng pinagdaanan. Ang lahat ay takot, ang lahat ay takot. Hanggang kailan tayo magtitiis? Magbubulag-bulagan hanggang kailan? Di kaya ito na ang hudyat upang tayo ay kumilos. Lunod na ang ating bayan sa tindi ng mga unos. Bumangon na tayo, bumangon na tayo. Bagong umaga na inaabangan, bagong pag-asa para sa ating bayan o Pilipinas. Handa ka na ba o Pilipinas? Handa ka na ba kay Lenny? At sa bagong umaga,
kailangan nating palayain ang sarili mula sa kasalukuyang sitwasyon. Lalaban ako. Lalaban tayo.
Puno ng takot at kaba, kailan matatapos ating pagluha? Marami ang nawalan ng trabaho't mahal sa buhay. Isang malungkot na balita, ngunit hindi tayo mayayanig. Isang bayan at Lenny tutulong, basta't sabay-sabay, walang mang-iiwan. iiwan. Ikaw at ako, tayo ay Pilipino. Ating dasal, tapat na pinuno. Nasaan ka man, Leni Robredo tayo. Marami na ang gumaling, salamat sa mga bayaning tumulong. Walang takot lumalaban, alay ang buhay sa pagsagip. Isang magandang balita, hinding-hindi tayo papayani. Isang bayan at Leni tutulong. Basta't sabay-sabay, walang mang-iiwan. Ikaw at ako, tayo ay Pilipino. Ating dasal, tapat na pinuno. Nasaan ka man, Leni Robredo tayo. Pagkahandaan natin kahit ano pang dumating, tayo'y isang bansang matibay na kahit banggain. Hindi kayang buwagin, hindi kayang buwagin. Sabay-sabay, walang mang-iiwan. Ikaw at ako, tayo ay Pilipino. Ating dasal, tapat na pinuno. Nasaan ka man, Leni Robredo tayo. Sabay-sabay, walang mang-iiwan. Ikaw at ako, tayo ay Pilipino. Ating dasal, tapat na pinuno. Nasaan ka man, Leni Robredo tayo. Sabay-sabay, walang mang-iiwan. Ikaw at ako, tayo ay Pilipino. Ating dasal, tapat na pinuno. Nasaan ka man, Leni Robredo tayo. Tapat na pinuno, tapat na Pilipino. Leni Robredo tayo.
Nagawa niyang tumulong sa kapwa, nagawa niyang mamuno sa tama. Nanindigan para kay Juan at kay Juan, laman ang isiping naglaban. Hangad niyang tayo ay mamuhay sa bansang ang lahat ay pantay. May karapatan tungo sa kaunlaran, handang maglingkod kailanman. Leni Robredo, nagawa niyang lahat. May lakas, may galing at may pusong tapat. Leni Robredo, ating isang ang lahat ay pantay. May karapatan tungo sa kaunlaran, handang maglingkod kailanman. Lenny Robredo, nagawa niyang lahat. May lakas, may galing at may pusong tapat. Lenny Robredo, ating pinuno, nagawa niyang lahat. Nagawa niyang ikaw ay turuan, buong pusong pinagsilbihan. Inangat ang lipunan, tinaas sa ating bayan, di tayo pinabayaan. Lenny Robredo, nagawa niyang lahat. May lakas, may galing at may pusong tapat. Lenny Robredo, ating pinuno, nagawa niyang lahat. Tumaan ang bagyo, di sumuko, ang ngiti sa matay di naglaho. Tumindig, lumipad, taas ang noo, pag-asa ng Pilipino. Nagawa niyang lahat. Robredo, pinuno. Nagawa niyang lahat. Robredo, pinuno. Nagawa niyang lahat. Nagawa niyang lahat. Robredo, pinuno. Lenny Robredo, kami ay saludo. Nagawa niyang lahat.
Sa ating opening prayer, tawagin po natin si dating Education Secretary at ngayon ay isa ring convener ng Isang Bayan, Brother Armin Luistro.
Alalahanin natin na ang Panginoon ay kasama po natin. Diyos ng sansinukob,
Wala, kuya. Okay, thank you.
Diyos ng sansinukob, mga puso namin nag-uumapaw sa kagalakan dahil dinalaw mo at tinubos ang iyong bayan. Dumating na ang bukang liwayway mula sa kalangitan na ngayoy bumabasag sa katahimikan at kadiliman ng napakahabang mga gabi. Diyos ng
Recording in
kasaysayan,
progress.
bumabangon kami ngayon ng may sariwang pag-asa para sa kinabukasan. Kalinga para sa bayang napagsamantalahan at mga kababayang napabayaan. Tumitindig kami ngayon upang gisingin ang natutulog pang lakas at makiisa sa pagtugon sa hamon ng bukas. Hindi lamang para sa aming sariling kapakanan, kundi para na rin sa mga nasa laylayan ng lipunan. Nangangahas kaming muling magmahal, dalisay, mapagmalasakit at radikal, upang maibalik sa kamay ng karaniwang Pilipino ang kakayahan nilang lumikha ng pagbabago para sa ikabubuti ng nakararami, lalo tigit ng mga hindi nakasali. Diyos ng sambayanan, gabayan po ninyo ang aming lupang hinirang. Kayo po ang aming kanlungan at sanggalang. Ang mga pinili naman naming manguna sa laban, sina VP Lenny Robredo at Senador Kiko Pangilinan, naway inyong basbasan at pangalagaan. Habang amin ngayong sinasabuhay, kabutihan at katapatan, tibay at husay. Mga pangako at ambag namin sa bayang marangal dahil kailangang ipaglaban ang mga minamahal. Hiling namin ito, dakilang bathala, siya nawa.
Bayang madilim, pelas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyat ka ng magiging, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisingin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bakaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kisag ng matawat mo'y tagumpay na nanininig. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di manigilig. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, mamamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Isang napakagandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Shout out po dyan sa mga nanonood sa atin sa Facebook Live at YouTube live stream. Magandang araw din po sa ating mga kapatid natin dito sa media na kasama na naman natin ngayong umaga sa Tapatan Media Forum. Diretso na po tayo ngayon sa aksyon at medyo maganda ang ating pag-uusapan ngayon. Nabalitaan na siguro natin ang kontrobersya sa Comelec na naganap nitong mga nakaraang linggo. Bago po magretiro si Commissioner Rowena Guanzon noong Pebrero 2, inilabas niya ang kanyang desisyon sa mga disqualification cases laban kay Bongbong Marcos na nakabinbin pa rin sa First Division ng Comelec. Ayon kay Commissioner Guanzon, ang hindi pagpasa ng income tax return ni Marcos ng 4 na beses sa isang maling halimbawa ng isang leader ng ating lipunan. Sabi po niya, instead of setting a good example for his constituents to emulate, Marcos acted as if the law did not apply to him. Thus, the inevitable conclusion is that he knowingly and deliberately chose not to comply with the positive duty enjoined by law. Sabi rin po niya, taken all together, all these circumstances reveal that his failure to file his tax returns for almost half a decade is reflective of a serious defect in one's moral fiber. Kasabay nito, isiniwalat niya na sinasadya umano ng ponente ng desisyon na si Commissioner Amy Ferolino na patagalin ang pagpapalabas ng desisyon sa kasong ito at hintayin ang pagbaba ni Commissioner Guanzon sa kanyang pwesto. Ang desisyon ni Commissioner Guanzon, i-disqualify po si Marcos Jr. base sa maraming kadahilanan. Pero dahil nagretiro na siya, hindi na counted po ang boto niya. Dagdag pa ni Commissioner Guanzon, tila may nakikialam umanong senador sa kaso, kaya ito inuupuan ni Commissioner Ferolino. Sa ganitong sitwasyon po, ano kaya ang mangyayari sa mga kaso na ito sa Comelec First Division? Sino ang magdedesisyon sa mga kaso ng disqualification laban sa anak ng diktador? Ano ang mga senaryo kapag na-disqualify si Bongbong Marcos? At ano ang mangyayari kapag na-disqualify siya at naproklama bilang bagong presidente ng ating bansa? Sasagutin natin ang mga katanungang iyan maya-maya lamang po. Sa ngayon po, ipapakilala muna natin ang ating mga panelists today. Meron po tayong 2 retiradong Supreme Court Justices bilang guests or speakers this morning. Ang unang magsasalita po ay si Justice Adolf Azcuna, retiradong mahistrado ng Supreme Court, dating Chancellor ng Philippine Judicial Academy o PhilJA, at miyembro ng both the 1986 Constitutional Commission at 1971 Constitutional Convention. Ang kanyang tatalakayin ay ang sagot sa tanong na what if the President-elect has been disqualified? At ang pangalawang magsasalita ay si Justice Antonio T. Carpio na isa ring retiradong mahistrado ng Korte Suprema at kasalukuyang isang bayan convenor. Ladies and gentlemen, we now give you Justice Azcuna. Justice Azcuna, you now have the floor po.
Salamat, Attorney JP. I'd like to greet Justice Carpio, Brother Armin, and all our listeners, lahat ng nakikinig sa atin. Pleasant good morning. I'd like to thank Isang Sambayanan for inviting me to this forum. And I'd like to proceed to answer the questions posed by the forum. No? What if the president-elect is disqualified, assuming, let's say that Bongbong Marcos is elected as president, but is disqualified after the election? It will depend. In my view, depende ito sa whether or not he has taken his oath. A president-elect qualifies, that is, assumes office by taking his oath. Okay. So if he is disqualified, assuming that these cases, Comelec goes up to the Supreme Court, and it takes time, and election is held, hindi pa na-decided with finality, and he decided only after the election is held, and assuming he is elected, he is proclaimed. But hindi pa naka-oath, disqualified. So he cannot take his oath kasi disqualified na siya. Ano ang sinasabi ng saligang batas tungkol dyan? Nandyan po yan sa Article 7 natin. Article 7 treats of the executive power. And dito sa Article 7, Section 7, it deals with the situation where the president-elect fails to qualify. That is, elected na siya, proclaimed na siya, pero hindi siya naka-take oath for one reason or another. In this case, it's because he was disqualified. So before he could take oath, na disqualified siya, he cannot take oath. What happens? According to Section 7, Article 7, the Vice President-elect shall act as president until the president-elect shall have qualified. So in that situation, the president-elect is disqualified, he cannot qualify, so hanap tayo ng ibang president-elect. So presumably, the next highest number of vote garnerer will be declared elected as president, in which case, that person can then qualify by taking the oath. Meanwhile, the vice president-elect acts as president, temporary lang. That's situation 1, failure to qualify. So there is a president-elect declared disqualified, so failure to qualify. Nandun po yan sa constitution natin. The second situation is, assuming president-elect na siya, naka-out na siya, naka-qualify na. So he's already incumbent president. And then he's disqualified. What happens? This is under Section 8, Article 7 pa rin. And under that provision, itong disqualification ng incumbent president is, in my opinion, a removal from office. And if the president, incumbent president, is removed from office, the vice president becomes president. So hindi na yung nag-garner ng second highest. It is the vice president who will now not act as president but becomes president. Permanent na yan. So that is for the remainder of the term of the removed president. That is the second situation. That is removal. The third situation is an election contest. President-elect assumes office, but a contest is filed in the Supreme Court by the second highest. And if that happens, you have a quo warranto case. Under Section 4 of Article 7, the Supreme Court is the sole judge of all contests relating to qualifications for president. So itong pagka-disqualified ni President-elect who was assumed can be challenged in an election contest by quo warranto. Ang maaari lang mag-challenge nito ang yung entitled to the office. So the number 2 in the election can file an election contest against the president-elect who has assumed office under Section 4, Article 7, and the Supreme Court decides that the incumbent is disqualified, is not qualified, then the petitioner in the quo warranto case becomes president, because the petitioner in a quo warranto case must be entitled to the office, must show that he or she is the one entitled to the office. So that is the third possibility, election contests, and Supreme Court decides. Those are the 3 situations, in my view, that will apply in case of disqualification of the president-elect. That is, depends on whether he or she has taken his oath, and then whether or not the removal is by election contest or through a disqualification case. The other thing I'd like to emphasize is that the disqualification now pending Comelec, as well as the petition for cancellation, refers to qualification to be a candidate, for president. So if he is disqualified or his candidacy is canceled, he is considered not qualified to be a candidate for president. After he is elected, assuming he is not disqualified before the election, he is elected, and he assumes office in an election contest, the question is now no longer his qualification to be a candidate, but his qualification to be president. That is different. And the procedure is different, and the result is different. That is, if he is declared not qualified to be president in a quo warranto case, the petitioner becomes president. Yan po ang aking palagay dito sa iba-ibang sitwasyon na mangyayari if the president-elect is disqualified. Maraming salamat po.
Yan, thank you very much po, Justice Ascuna. Yan, kaklaruhin lang ulit po natin, no? So ang sagot ni Justice Ascuna kung anong mangyayari kung ma-disqualify si Bongbong Marcos, depende sa period ng pagka-disqualifika. Kapag before siya nag-take ng oath o nanumpa, iba po yun. Yan po yung nasa Comelec. Kapag nanumpa na po siya, ang sabi po ni Justice Ascuna, magkakaroon tayo ng succession. So ang Vice President, siya na ngayon ang magiging president. Naku, alam ko maraming katanungan sa isyong yan. At ang pangatlo po ay yung tinatawag natin na election contest by quo warranto sa Supreme Court. Ayan po, no? So sa ating mga kapatid sa media, ayan, very fertile ng mga tanong itong mga periods na ito. Ang daming what ifs, no? Ang daming what ifs, ang daming pwedeng maitanong at epekto nito sa ating politika at sa ating bayan. Thank you so much, Justice Adolf. Ang susunod naman pong Thank you po. Ang susunod naman pong magsasalita ay walang iba kundi si Justice Tony Carpio. Justice Tony, you have the floor po.
Thank you, JP. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. I will go straight to the point. In its resolution of January 17, 2022, the Comelec Second Division...
Ayaw niyang mag-mute ako.
Can you hear me?
Opo, we can hear you po.
Okay. The Comelec Second Division acknowledged that the final and executory 1995 decision of the Court of Appeals, number 1, found that Marcos Jr. was convicted by final judgment of a crime on 4 counts for non-filing of income tax return from 1982 to 1985 and was imposed a fine for each count of the crime. This was the first finding of the Comelec Second Division from the Court of Appeals decision. Second, under the tax code, the penalty for the crime of non-filing of the 1985 ITR is perpetual disqualification from public office. PD 1994, promulgated issued by President Marcos, and amending the tax code and imposing perpetual disqualification took effect on January 1, 1986. This was the conclusion of the Comelec Second Division, that the perpetual disqualification took effect under the law on January 1, 1986. If you violate the tax code, a public officer is perpetually disqualified. And that law, PD 1994, took effect January 1, 1986. And third, the Comelec Second Division said the last day for filing the 1985 income tax return was March 18, 1986. So these are the findings and conclusions of the Second Comelec Division. However, the Second Comelec Division ruled that Marcos cannot be disqualified because of two reasons. Disqualification, the first reason is that disqualification was not imposed in the CA decision, as the RTC and CA decisions were silent on disqualification. The RTC and the CA decisions were silent on perpetual disqualification. That's the reason, the first reason why the Comelec Second Division said Marcos Jr. cannot be disqualified. Second reason is that Marcos Jr. was no longer a public officer on March 18, 1986, when the deadline for filing the 1985 ITR fell. The deadline was March 18, 1986, and the Comelec Second Division said Marcos Jr. was no longer a public officer on that day because the Marcoses fled the country on February 26, 1986, following the People Power. So for these two reasons, Marcos Jr. could not be disqualified. Now, let me address those two reasons. First of all, there is no need to impose the penalty of perpetual disqualification in the RTC or CA decision because perpetual disqualification is already imposed by operation of law as a consequence of any criminal violation of the tax code. The law itself imposes the perpetual disqualification automatically upon conviction of any crime under the tax code. The perpetual disqualification in the tax code is not a penalty that must be stated in the decision. Under the old Section 352, which is now 255, Section 255 of the tax code, the penalty imposable by the court is only either a fine or imprisonment or both. Under the present Section 255 of the tax code, the penalty imposable by the court is only a fine and imprisonment. Under either the old Section 352 or the present Section 255, there is no mention of perpetual disqualification in the penalty to be imposed by the court. To reiterate, the only penalty that the court can impose under the old Section 352 is fine, imprisonment, or both, and the only penalty that the court can impose under the present Section 255 is fine and imprisonment. There is no mention of perpetual disqualification under the old Section 352 or the present Section 255 that the court can impose. Now, the court cannot impose a penalty that it is not authorized to impose. The tax code did not authorize the court to impose the penalty of perpetual disqualification because the law itself automatically and mandatorily imposes perpetual disqualification on any public officer convicted of any criminal violation of the tax code. The perpetual disqualification in the tax code is separate and distinct from the penalty imposable by the court because the law itself imposes perpetual disqualification in another section. The perpetual disqualification for any criminal violation of the tax code is imposed automatically by law. It need not be stated in the decision. To repeat, there is no need for the court to impose this perpetual disqualification because this perpetual disqualification is automatically imposed by operation of law on any person convicted of any crime under the tax code, whether involving moral turpitude or not. Now let's go to the second reason. The RTC, Quezon City, found that Marcos Jr. was governor of Ilocos Norte from November 3, 1982 up to March 31, 1986. The finding of the trial court was that Marcos Jr. was governor of Ilocos Norte from, and I quote, November 3, 1982 up to March 31, 1986, quote unquote. This finding of fact was not changed or modified in the CA decision. Marcos Jr. did not challenge or question this finding of fact in his appeal to the CA. This finding of fact is already res judicata and can no longer be changed by the Comelec or any court. The government, the courts, and Marcos Jr. are bound by this finding of fact that Marcos Jr. was governor of Ilocos Norte until March 31, 1986. The deadline for filing the ITR was March 18. So when the deadline fell, he was still governor. That is the finding of the RTC, and that was not disturbed by the Court of Appeals, and Marcos Jr. did not question that. So that's final already. Moreover, Proclamation number 3 of President Aquino, Cory Aquino, dated March 25, 1986, adopting the Freedom Constitution. This is the Freedom Constitution, adopted March 25, 1986, a few days after the March 18 deadline for filing ITR. The Freedom Constitution states, and I quote, all elective and appointed officials and employees under the 1973 Constitution shall continue in office until otherwise provided by proclamation or executive order or upon the designation or appointment and qualification of their successors, if such is made within a period of 1 year from February 25, 1986, end of quote. Marcos Jr. was elected under the 1973 Constitution, and he was clearly covered by this provision of the Freedom Constitution. The Freedom Constitution, adopted on March 25, 1986, stated that public officials elected under the 1973 Constitution, and that included Marcos Jr., continued in office until removed or replaced. Marcos Jr. remained a public officer until March 31, 1986, as found clearly by the RTC, a finding that Marcos Jr. never questioned. So when the deadline of March 18, 1986 arrived for the filing of the ITR, Marcos Jr. was clearly still a public officer. The fact that he left for Hawaii is immaterial. He could have filed his 1985 ITR with the Philippine consulate in Hawaii. Marcos Jr. claimed that he fled fearing for his life, but fleeing the country when he himself was not ousted from office did not change his status as a public officer and did not exempt him from filing his ITR. In conclusion, when Marcos Jr. failed to file his ITR, his 1985 ITR on March 18, 1986, the deadline for filing his ITR, he was still a public officer and governed by Section 252, now Section 253 of the Tax Code, which mandates perpetual disqualification on public officers convicted of any crime under the Tax Code, whether the crime involves moral turpitude or not. That ends my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you po, Justice Tony, sa isang napakamaliwanag na presentation po ninyo. No? Sa ating mga kababayan po, perpetual disqualification means na hindi na maaari o pwedeng magkandidato sa isang posisyon ang isang tao. No? So ang sinasabi sa atin ni Justice Carpio po ngayon, na hindi na kailangan sabihin ng Court of Appeals na si Marcos Jr. daw po ay perpetually disqualified kasi ang batas na mismo ang nagsasabi na kapag nag-violate kayo ng tax code ay automatic, assumed, dapat perpetually disqualified na po ang isang kandidato. Maraming salamat po, Justice Tony. Ayan po, maraming salamat sa ating mga panelists sa kanilang mga presentations. Ngayon po, dumako na tayo sa ating open forum. Okay po? Pero bago po natin buksan ang ating open forum, pakinggan po natin ulit ang ating mga house rules. Para po sa mga katanungan natin, dalawang paraan po. Raise your hand at hintayin pong tawagin ang inyong pangalan o isulat po ang inyong katanungan sa chat box ng Zoom. Ayan po. We have members of the media who are with us today. Is there anyone po who wants to ask questions to Justice Tony or to Justice Ascuna? you may already raise your hand po. Kung wala pa po, uunahin po muna natin ang ating mga netizens. Okay, Lian Buwan from Rappler. Okay, said she's going to ask a question. Lian, please, you now have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you po, Attorney JP. Good morning, Justices Ascona and Justice Carpio. Good to see you po. Actually, ang concern ko po is the prospect of going to the Supreme Court kasi we know that there are several in the Comelec, tas mag-a-unbank pa sila. Pag umakyat po ba sa Supreme Court, will it be treated as a consolidated case? And diretso po ba yun sa unbank? And with a case like this, are we expecting oral arguments po kaya?
Okay, maybe the two justices can answer, Justice Tony and Justice Ascuna. Thank you.
Yeah, seniority first, Justice Ascuna.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, Justice Adolf, kayo po muna siguro. Thank you.
You're muted.
Okay.
The case from the Comelec has to be decided first by the Comelec and bank before it can go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court cannot review a division's decision of the Comelec. So after it's decided by the Comelec and bank, it can go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will have to consider that also unbank, not by division. So that's the rule.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just add, that's correct. I'd like to add that from the end bank, the parties, either side, can appeal to the Supreme Court, but the decision of the end bank becomes final and executory within 5 days, unless the Supreme Court issues a TRO. So if, for example, Marcos Jr. is disqualified, he has the burden of getting a TRO from the Supreme Court within 5 days. Otherwise, the decision becomes final and executory, or the decision is rather executory, not final. Executory, and it will be implemented by the Comelec. Now, it is always en banc because this is a decision from the Comelec, so it will always go to the en banc. And if there are several appeals, because there are several cases coming from the Comelec, it will always be consolidated. That's the practice, because the issues are related. They're about disqualification of Marcos Jr. So that's correct. You have to go through the Comelec and bank. You cannot go straight. If the parties go straight to the and Supreme Court direct from the second division or the first division, it will be thrown out by the Supreme Court. So there is a process from the division of from the first or second division of Comelec. It has to go to the Comelec and bank, and the Comelec and bank can consolidate the two cases if it wants to. And from the Comelec and bank, it goes to the Supreme Court, and the decision becomes executory within 5 days, unless a TRO is issued by the Supreme Court and bank. Thank you.
Just Scarpio, can I follow up lang po? Isa lang. For example, one division disqualifies Marcos and that is upheld by the Comelec and bank. Sabi nyo nga po, executory na siya kaagad executory na siya within 5 days. So when that happens, like Marcos would have to be forced to go to the Supreme Court agad-agad without waiting for the other cases of his sa Comelec kasi kailangan niya nang makasecure ng TRO for that one decision.
Yeah, of course, because these are separate cases. He has to go to the Supreme Court within 5 days. In fact, if he does not go, it becomes final. The decision becomes final. So immediately, either party must go directly to the Supreme Court within 5 days. Otherwise, the decision becomes final.
All right. Thank you po. That's it for me. Salamat po, Justices. Thank you.
Thank you, Lian Buwan from Rappler. Okay. Is there another member of the media who wants to ask question po? If not, I will ask po a question from a netizen. Ayan po. This question is addressed po to Justice Ascuna and to Justice Carpio. Sa ngayon daw po, hindi naman madidiskwalipika si Bongbong Marcos kasi papalapit na ang eleksyon at mukhang dinidribble ng Comelec ang paglabas ng desisyon. Pag nanalo po si Marcos at nanalo din po si Duterte at madiskwalipika si Bongbong Marcos bilang presidente, ibig po sabihin nito ay si Sara Duterte ang magiging vice-presidente ayon kay Justice Ascuna. Ito ho daw ba ay sinasadya ng administrasyon? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Justice Adolf will answer that. That's his topic.
Okay, I cannot speak for the administration. Regularity is presumed unless proven otherwise. So we cannot assume bad faith. So palagay ko the delay partly caused by the fact that there are vacancies, and we have to fill up the vacancies in the Comelec before they can complete the division that will decide the cases. And the president cannot appoint unless they are recommended by the Judicial and Bar Council. This replacement. So medyo may proseso yan at it will take some time before the vacancies can be filled. Of course, there can be temporary assignments by the Comelec, but it's up to them. If they are undermanned, they might not be able to do that. So I think, the obvious cause for the delay right now. We cannot presume anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Ascuna. Just a follow-up question din po from Flora Villanueva, also a Facebook user. Yung mga justices appointed po ba ni Presidente Duterte, hindi ba makaka-apekto sa decision nila ito, ang kanilang appointment?
Well, we have to assume that the justices, the Comelec commissioners, will be performing their duty regularly and in good faith. We cannot assume bad faith. So we just have to wait. If we don't agree with the decision, we can file a motion for recon because that's what's stated in the Constitution. Thank you.
Okay. Another question po from Leonila Marasigan from Facebook for Justice Tony. Paano po ba na ngayon ay naka-imprenta na ang balota? Anong epekto kapag may na-disqualify at ando na ang pangalan niya sa balota? Thank you.
Well, if you are disqualified after the printing, any vote that is cast in your name, in your favor, is a stray vote and void, will not be counted. That's the effect. If you are disqualified, all votes will be considered stray and void, and those votes will not be counted. Even if you get the highest number of votes. That happened to Halusos. He was disqualified after election day. He got the highest number of votes, but the Supreme Court said all those votes are void, and the second placer actually legally got the highest number of votes. Thank you.
Okay. There's a question po from Giselle from GMA7. Okay.
Yes. Good morning po. Can you hear me po?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Good morning po, Giselle Ombay po of GMA News Online. Medyo off topic lang po yung question ko, but maybe Attorney Calleja or Justice Carpio can answer po. So just this morning, Yodi de Guzman's campaign manager, Sonny Melencio, said during an interview that they tried to reach out to VP Leni and Isambayan when she was still trying to forge a united opposition. However po, in Melencio's words po, you ignored them daw po. Thus, no meetings ever occurred between your parties po. So, Melencio also floated the possibility that he could just have supported VP Leni in the presidential race if nakipag-coordinate daw po kayo sa kanya. So, totoo po ba ito na inignore niyo po siya, and why is that?
I'll let Justice Tony, our chair, answer that question. Thank you.
Is Howie here?
He's not here po. Brother Armin is also here.
Yeah.
He's also an isang bayan convener.
You're talking of who's this candidate, Melencio?
Yes po, from Calyodi de Guzman's camp po.
Aliodi de Guzman.
Yes po.
Well, I'm not involved in the unification. This is done by the group of VP Lenny, and I really don't know the facts here, no? Whether he was ignored or he was informed. I'm sorry, but I do not know the discussions or whether Leody de Guzman reach out to the VP Lenny group. I really don't know. Thank you.
May maa-add po ba si Attorney Calleja?
I will adopt also the answer of Justice Carpio. We are not familiar. We don't have personal knowledge of any effort ng pag-reach out niya kay VP Lenny. Thank you.
Okay po. Thank you. Thank you po.
All right. Next question po. Next question. Meron pa po tayo ngayong mga questions pa. Marami pa po from our Facebook user kay Justice Azcuda. Sir, another question. Is it okay to proceed, Ms. Giselle? Or you have a follow-up question? Okay
None
na?
na po. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So, Justice Azcuna, you mentioned po that once or a president-elect assumes office once he takes an oath or kapag nanumpa na po siya. Pero pwede pa rin po siyang madiskwalipika. Questions po, sino po yung magdidiskwalipika sa kanya once he took an oath? And how many years po ba ito bago magkaroon ng desisyon? Thank you.
Okay, the disqualification of an incumbent president can be done in a quo warranto case in an election contest under Section 4, Article 7, or it can be done by impeachment, a removal by impeachment, and that is done by Congress, or it can be done by the Supreme Court in a petition for disqualification that has lasted until after the election and after the qualification of the president, although that is probably far-fetched because they should decide that before the election. Because as I said, that is a question on the fitness to be a candidate, not to be a president, to be a candidate. So if they cannot decide that before the election, it becomes moot actually. Kasi tapos na yung election eh. So all questions about fitness to be a candidate should be decided before the election. Now after the election, after the oath taking, the president-elect has assumed office, he or she can only be removed by either by impeachment or by quo warranto. And impeachment is by Congress, quo warranto is by the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Justice. A follow-up question po. All the people are excited to know the result in the disqualification cases. That means before Bongbong Marcos, if ever he will be elected, will take an oath. Pero, is there a way daw po to speed things up pagdating sa DQ cases niya sa Comelec? Or maybe Justice Tony can also answer po. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, there is a deadline if you file a petition to cancel COC or to the due course. The Omnibus Election Code says the Comelec and bank must decide it 15 days before election day. So there is a deadline. And the Comelec has, in the past, has decided all the disqualification cases for national offices for president and vice president before the deadline. And but for lower echelon official candidates, well, probably they were not able to comply. But definitely in the past 3 national presidential elections, they complied with the mandate of the Omnibus Election Code. Thank you.
Okay. Another question to Justice Carpio from a Facebook user. Justice Carpio, what is the effect, if any, of the decision of Commissioner Guanzon kung hindi man ito maika-count?
Well, because Commissioner Guanzon retired already before there was a voting, then that draft opinion of hers will no longer be counted, because the decision will now be resolved by a new members of the First Division. There are now new members, and that draft of Commissioner Guanzon is part of the records, but it cannot be promulgated. Thank you.
Okay. A follow-up question po doon, is there any value sa decision daw po ni Commissioner Guanzon, although not counted?
Well, it's an opinion, and just like my opinion, the opinion of Justice Escuna, the justices, the commissioners can accept it or reject it. It's not binding on the Comelec. Thank you.
Thank you po. Next question po is for Brother Armin Luistro from a Facebook user. Brother Armin, we know that you are very active campaigning for VP Leni. Ano po ang mga hakbang ng isang bayan to rally votes for the Leni Kiko team? And ano daw po ang mga reaksyon ng fellow religious ninyo or mga priest that a brother or a man of cloth is actively campaigning for VP Leni? Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Yung mga isang bayan chapters, these are local chapters, pero meron din tayong maraming chapters abroad. And then we also have isang bayan member organizations, no? Lahat ng 'yan may kanya-kanyang membership nationwide. So ang talagang ginagawa ng isang bayan, tinutulungan natin yung chapters kung paano natin ikino-coordinate yung kanilang mga pangangailangan, no? It's a little easy for us because the campaign of VP Leni and Senator Kiko is really organic. So even fundraising is really done locally. A lot of the materials are really crowdsourced. So the main work of isang bayan is really coordination, no? And then if there are needs that are not met on the local level, we also try to reach out to them, no? And then match those needs with our different partners, no? Karabihan din dun sa isang bayan membership ay religious, ha? So may mga iba-ibang kategory ito. Meron tayong mga parishes, meron tayong mga Christian denominations, hindi lang Katoliko. Meron din tayong mga iglesia, meron din tayong mga religious congregations. Some of them have big schools like Lasal. Meron din may mga Catholic schools and hospitals. So in many instances, hindi rin siya mahirap kasi most of the religious groups, but more critically, sa Catholic Church, ang tawag natin dyan, yung lay people or yung laiko. Laiko is the biggest organization in the Catholic Church. They are the ones who really are at the forefront of the Leni campaign, no? And I think unlike in previous elections, palaging ang discussion is, ang simbahan ba, meron bang separation of church and state? Mapapansin nyo, hindi na yan masyadong tinatanong ngayon. Because I think medyo nagasgas na yung tanong na yan, eh. It has been answered so many times na the church role is so critical in ensuring that the political world is also influenced by the same values that we proclaim inside the churches, no? So makikita nyo, parami ng parami yung mga bishops, mga madre, pare, o kaya brothers, pati yung mga institutions, no? Schools, dioceses, nagpapahayag. And this is really more not about partisanship more than principled politics. No? And you will see that in the discussions, it's not about the preference of sino ba yung mas magaling na kandidato. Ang pinag-uusapan palagi, pagkakausap nyo, mga taong simbahan, ano yung mga values na dapat gamitin para iboto ito. Pero, sinasabi ng simbahan, ano yung mga values na nagtutulak sa atin na sabihin, itong kandidatong ito dapat hindi iboto. So, I think that's very clear in the church today. Thank you.
Just a follow-up question daw po, Brother Armin. Marami sa mga kabataan ngayon ang naniniwala na golden era ang martial law. In fact, majority of the supporters of BBM are from the youth. Question po, may kasalanan daw po ba ang Department of Education dahil lahat naman ito ay nagsipag-aral sa public school?
May kasalanan ang DepEd, may kasalanan ang CHED, may kasalanan ang mga pamilya, may kasalanan ang mga simbahan, pero ang pinakamalaking kasalanan, at ito naman ay backed by research and all the literature, is really social media. Nagbago po ngayon ang preference. What came out in media on the use of algorithms para malaman kung ano yung ating pinapasukan sa social media and internet has shown us na ang pinakamalaking influence na kung bakit yung mga Pilipino merong preference sa candidate A over B is because of what they view sa YouTube, TikTok, at iba pang mga media platforms. So, kailangan nating tingnan yan kasi yung mga curriculum sa mga eskwelahan, pati na rin yung preaching and homilies in the churches has been proven not to be a major influence anymore. And actually, that's sad. That's really sad. And then secondly, yung nag-aaral nitong mga preferences ng mga kabataan ngayon, nakikita, it's an emotional choice more than an intellectual choice. So pati yung mga, pag tinatanong mo sila, bakit ito yung iboboto mo, ang sasagutin nila hindi something logical all the time. So it's not about information, it's about really a very, very roundabout way of influencing them the way commercial advertisements do for our preferences. No? So medyo masalimucha. Pero ang sagot, lahat tayo may kasalanan kasi pinayagan natin to eh.
Okay, thank you, Brother Armin. Next question po from one of our media guests, to Justice Tony and to Justice Azcuna. How do you plan to push for the release of the First Division's decision on Marcos cases? How do you plan to push for the release of the First Division's decision on Marcos cases? If we have a plan to release, to push for the release.
Well, it's up to the parties and their councils to file motions for early resolution and for media to demand that the First Division decide it already. But if you look at the situation now, there are vacancies in the First Division, and they have to reshuffle, and there are 3 new commissioners that the president might appoint. No, so I think it will take some time before they settle down. We still don't know who will go to what division. Thank you.
Justice Azcuna, you want to add something po?
No, I completely agree with what Justice Tony said.
Okay. Thank you po. Another question po. Anyone may answer daw po. Why do our laws allow whatever the Marcoses are doing, like revising history through troll farms, YouTube, funding disinformation? Why do our laws allow whatever they are doing daw po? Hindi daw po ba masyadong maluwag ang ating freedom for information or freedom of speech? Thank you.
Maybe Justice Adolf can take a first crack.
Yeah, this is a free country. The solution, according to Justice Holmes, to falsity is the truth. No, so you fight the falsity with truth. So there's an open marketplace of ideas. You just have to combat the false ideas with true ideas.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with that. This is a free country. We have freedom of speech, and I am a strong defender of freedom of speech. But of course, speech can also be limited in certain ways to address the general welfare. The House and the Senate just adopted a new SIM card registration and social media registration. In other words, if you want to say something, you want to post a comment in Facebook or YouTube, you must give your true name. You must register your true name. Why? Because of course, if you use a fake name, fake identity, anonymous name, you feel you're not obligated to follow the law. You will just libel anybody, and this is the problem now, because Facebook allows anyone to register using an anonymous or fictitious name, and if you are using a fictitious name, you don't feel responsible for your statements. You just libel anyone, and this has made the discussion in Facebook very toxic. And this has allowed people from other countries like China. They now pose as Filipinos in Facebook and attack our politicians who are against China. Attack me, for example. They post comments in my column, but these are obviously from China. But they use fake names, anonymous. Now, the new law says you must register your true name with the platform, because if you make a libelous statement, the aggrieved party can sue and can ask the platform owner what is the real name of this commentator if he's using a pseudonym. So slowly we are addressing this issue. The law is catching up on new technology. In other countries, they have banned hate speech. You cannot post libelous statements because the platform itself will be liable. In Germany, for example, here we are requiring the platform to get the real identity of the user, so that if there's anyone who is libeled, that person who is libeled can get your real name from the platform owner and your address and can sue you. So there is now recourse. Before this law, nobody has a recourse. I've been attacked on social media by anonymous people. I don't know even whom to sue. Now they will have to reveal their real name to the platform owner, and I have now a recourse. And that will now, I think, make discussion in social media less toxic. It will be more civil now, and that's how it goes. I mean, the law is catching up on new technologies. Thank you.
Yeah. Another question po to Justice Tony. In this election, electronic machines will be used to count our votes. How do we guard the sanctity of our votes without tamper daw po?
Well, in Isang Bayan, we have drawn up plans for this. We will have poll watchers in all the 95,000 precincts nationwide. And our poll watchers will be armed with a smartphone app. So they will take pictures of the election returns at the precinct level, because the election returns are made available to the political parties and posted on the public places in the precinct. So we have the source document. And also, if the SD card has been hacked, it has been tampered to print out different results from the one from the one from those who actually voted, there is a random manual audit that the law says must be held at the close of voting hours on election day. And this random manual audit will check whether the ballots physically, the random manual audit involves a physical count of the ballots to check whether it jives with the computer-generated election returns. If there is a variance, then we know that the SD card has been tampered with, because the SD card will be delivered from the Metro Manila warehouses of Comelec to every precinct nationwide. And there's a lot of places, a lot of time where these SD cards can be replaced or be tampered with. So the law has a built-in mechanism to check this, and that is the random manual audit. The law says 2 precincts per legislative district nationwide, and the random manual audit must be held at the close of voting hours on election day. And we will insist that the law be followed. So there are ways of preventing tampering of the operating system. Thank you.
Thank you po, Justice Tony. Brother Armin, there's a reaction po from Roger Araneta. Most of us here believe though po that VP Lenny is the right choice for president. But how can we convince and deliver the logical message, especially to the young voters, if they merely rely on emotions? Thank you.
The best way of reaching out to young people is through the young people themselves, who also are passionate about VP Lenny's campaign. I've gone around a few, and these are just a few of the sorties. I've seen them with my own eyes, but I've also viewed some of those that have been posted in social media. I am so heartened by the fact that a lot of the campaign, even in the provinces, are really youth-led. And that's why you'll see a lot of the unusual, exotic campaign strategies are being led by young people. I think that makes a lot of sense, because young people can talk about. I think this election is about young people. Kami ni Justice Tony, Justice Ascuna, we will survive the next few years. We don't know how long, but another 6 years of a bad president will have a terrible, terrible impact on our young people and their dreams. And I think that's what the young people are fighting for. No? This is the fight of their lives. Kami will be on the background. We will do our little share. Kailangan kausapin ng mga kabataan yung kapwa-kabataan nila. And it's not, that conversation is not a debate. Maganda yung debate kasi sanay tayo dyan sa mga formal debates. Pero ang kampanya ito, hindi pwede talaga yung makikipag-away ka. Kailangan unang-una pakinggan. At dyan magaling si VP Lenny. Kaya yung kabataan, mas madaling pasukan yung kampanya ni VP. Kasi ang unang ginagawa ni VP, talagang pinapakinggan naman niya muna. Pinupuntahan niya at she wastes time with them. And that's what young people need to do. No? So, more than just sa social media, kailangan dalhin natin yung campaign doon sa tao. At palagay ko talagang our young people can do that. They don't need to be trained, because young people are very good in person-to-person conversations. So palagay ko ito yung magiging kakaiba sa May 2022 elections. Thank you.
Okay. Next question po, address po sa ating mga speakers this morning. Anyone can answer po. What can you expect daw po in a Marcos presidency vis-a-vis Robredo presidency? Ayan, medyo mahirap bang tanong, Brother Armin? Ano daw po ang ini-expect daw po ninyo? Marcos presidency vis-a-vis Robredo presidency. Ayan. Siguro po,
Ako na
okay.
muna,
I will
ako na
take the
muna
question.
mauna para kung anong mali ko can
Okay.
be corrected by the two justices. Palagay ko, madali lang sagutin kung ibabase natin to doon sa ano nakita na natin, no? Kung tatapatin ko si Bongbong in the past 6 years, wala naman talaga siyang government position. At the previous government position niya is as governor of Ilocos Norte, no? Kung titingnan natin kung nasan ang Ilocos Norte ngayon, and what he is talking about, yung big dreams for the Philippines, parang ang tinatanong ko sa sarili ko, sana yung mga ipinapangako niya ngayon na gagawin sa Pilipinas, mas madaling paniwalaan kung makikita natin man lang ang ilan dyan sa Ilocos Norte ngayon. Ang pinapakita na naman yung Banggi, itong electric fan, di ba? Hindi maipakita yung tunay na pagbabago sa Ilocos Norte. No? Kay VP Lenny, sa maliit na budget ng opisina ng OVP, talagang nasagad niya yan at ang dami niyang natulungan. No? So sa akin, ito yung malaking pagkakaiba. Yung isa, pangako na napako. Yung isa, pero tayong makikita na given a little, so much results can be done. No? And that's not just VP Lenny. Hindi siya nakatutok sa kanyang personality lang. It's called leadership. The president does not have to do everything. At siguro ito yung palpak sa atin. Inaasa natin lahat sa Pangulo at inaasa lahat sa budget. Kay VP Lenny, ang nakita ko, hindi kailangan kung anong budget lang ang nandyan. Pwede namang mag-reach out sa private sector. Pwede namang mag-fundraising. Pwede namang humingi ng tulong sa iba. Hindi kailangan mang-away, kailangan pagtulong-tulungan. No? So, I think that is the basic difference between the two from my point of view. Thank you.
Justice Tony?
Yes, thank you for that question. That question really goes into the heart of why I am with Isambayan. My advocacy has been to defend the West Philippine Sea against encroachment by China. And Bongbong Marcos said that, like President Duterte, I will set aside the arbitral award if I get elected. Like President Duterte, Bongbong Marcos said, talo na tayo sa West Philippine Sea. Duterte said that China is already in possession of the West Philippine Sea. Inutil ako pagdating sa West Philippine Sea. Sabi ni Bongbong, we already lost the West Philippine Sea. So, my fear is if in a Marcos Jr. presidency, we will lose the West Philippine Sea for sure. After 6 years of inaction by President Duterte, another 6 years, and Bongbong Marcos has already told us, we already lost the West Philippine Sea. Pag akong naging presidente, I will set aside the arbitral award. That's why I had to come in. I had to oppose this plan. That's why I joined the Isambayan. And I said, we must select a candidate who will defend the West Philippine Sea against Chinese encroachment. So to the youth, if you want our marine resources, our oil and gas, our fisheries in the West Philippine Sea to be reserved for you and your children and grandchildren, you have to elect a president who will defend our sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. Do not elect somebody who will give away the West Philippine Sea to China. That's the big difference for me. And that's why I am so involved in this election, because we have to defend the West Philippine Sea, and the next president is critical in defending the West Philippine Sea. We cannot elect another president who will say, inutil ako pagdating sa West Philippine Sea. Mawawala na sa atin ang West Philippine Sea if for the next 6 years, another president will not do anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Tony. Justice Ascuna.
I think our situation is so bad that only a woman can save us.
Thank you. Wow, very short but very telling answer, Justice Ascuna. Thank you so much po. Now we have a question from the Inquirer, Donna Pazibugan, addressed to Justices Ascuna and Justice Carpio. Aside from filing an appeal of the Comelec's decision, can a separate quo warranto case versus Marcos be filed before the Supreme Court? Should he get elected? What do you think of the prospects of a quo warranto case? From Donna Pazibugan of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Thank you.
Maybe Justice Ascuna can answer first.
Yes, the election contest has to be filed after the election against a respondent who has assumed office, has been declared the winner, and by someone who claims that he or she is the winner. And how the Supreme Court will decide that is anybody's guess. It will depend on the court. And we cannot prejudge. Even if I were sitting there, I will say I will decide after I hear the oral arguments. So you cannot until after it's submitted for decision. Thank you.
Okay.
I agree with Justice Ascuna. There has to be a case filed after the elections, an election contest, and a quo warranto. And it has to be filed by somebody who is claiming to be the rightful president, to have been the rightfully elected president. So it will be an election contest, and in the election contest, that can include the quo warranto. Thank you.
Thank you. And another question po for our two justices. In a Robredo presidency, what can be done to put the Marcoses accountable for their crimes? Thank you.
Let me answer that first. Well, there is a estate tax liability of the Marcos estate, and it's now about 203 billion pesos. That's final and executory. It cannot be questioned anymore. And the administrator of the estate is Marcos Jr., Bongbong Marcos, and he is legally obliged to pay this debt to the government. And under the law, the number one creditor of the estate, who must be paid first before anyone can get part of the estate, before the heirs can get any part of their inheritance, they have to pay first this tax liability, 203 billion pesos. And that has to be collected because the Marcoses want to run the government. The number one power of the president is to execute the law. That means to collect taxes. But how can he collect taxes from himself, from his own family? 203 billion. So we will have a problem there. Thank you.
Justice Idol?
Yes, whoever becomes president, I think my message is simply this. Article 11, Section 1, which I personally wrote at the back of an envelope before I read it before the Constitutional Commission. Public office is a public trust. Public officers and employees must at all times be accountable to the people, serve them with utmost responsibility, integrity, loyalty, and efficiency, act with patriotism and justice, and lead modest lives. Let's not forget that. So everybody, whoever wins, must follow that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question po from the members of the media, if any. If none, I will ask the last question from our netizens. Okay, it seems that our media members have no more question from ABS-CBN. They're here. Okay, our last question po from our netizens. For Justice Ascuna and Justice Carpio, In your years as Supreme Court Justice, you were fighting for truth and justice. Can you tell the forum, or can you tell the public now that the Robredo presidency daw po is the closer presidency in your advocacy while you were still in the Supreme Court? Thank you.
Justice Ascuna, you take the first crack.
The Robredo presidency as a possibility is something I leave to the Filipino people. In my stint in the Supreme Court, I tried, as I said, to serve our people with utmost integrity and loyalty and patriotism. And I hope that whoever wins will do the same. So what is the challenge? I leave to our people the choice for who will lead us in the next 6 years. It's a very critical choice. I urge them to really pray hard before making that choice. I was advised by the late Justice Puno, Ricardo Puno, when I was in the Supreme Court, to pray. There was a crucifix behind me. He said, "You pray before you make any decision." I urge all the voters, my fellow Filipinos, to do the same. Pray before you vote, so that your vote will be really enlightened. Thank you.
Thank you. Justice Carpio?
Yeah, as chair of the Isambayan, we selected VP Lenny as our presidential candidate based on 4 criteria. Integrity, walang bahids, kahit anuman si Lenny. 2, competence. Lenny has proven her competence as a NGO worker, as a congresswoman, and now as a vice president. You can really see her competence. 3rd, patriotism. And for me, this is what is really important for me at this point in time. Because patriotism means you will defend the country against foreign aggressors, against foreign encroachment. And we should look at this as the number one element that must be satisfied by anyone who wants to be president. Will you defend the West Philippine Sea against China? And 4th criteria, the 4th criterion is that you must have a vision for the country. Where do you see the country 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now? All of these criteria only VP Lenny possesses. And that's why I've been working hard for the candidacy of VP Lenny. Thank you.
Ayan, dyan po natin tutuldukan ang isa na namang tapatan. Pero sandali lamang po, meron pa tayong closing statements po, no? So stay tuned po sa ating page para sa ating mga susunod na announcements po, no? So ngayon po, tatawagin ulit natin ang ating mga esteemed guests and speakers para sa kanilang mga partial closing statements or parting shots. Unahin po muna natin si Brother Armin, next po si Justice Ascuna, then si Justice Carpio. Brother Armin, closing statement.
Being the only person who's not in the legal profession, I'm really more an educator and a religious. I recognize how critical is the justice system in pursuing hope for our country. Pagpapakinggan ko yung mga hinaing at saka yung complaint ng mga nasa ibaba, nasa laylayan, karamihan dito, it's about justice eh. Hindi nila nakukuha yung justice. In fact, they don't trust the courts. Kasi ang tingin nila, hindi naman namin makukuha yung justice at gagastos pa kami, wala kaming pera. If there's anything that I hope we could work for in the next administration, and here our retired justices can really be of help, is to really bring back justice to the poor.
Kasi parang ang daming problema natin o nag-uugat doon eh. Pag wala na silang malalapitan and even the justice system is not credible for them, parang kakapit na sila sa patalim eh. And I think this is one area that we all can work together, no? To make sure that the institution of and our justice system can be responsive to the needs of the poor. Thank you.
Thank you po. Justice Ascuna.
Thank you. As a parting shot, I'd like to recount the ways by which democracies die. One is when there is no more opposition. Another is when the freedom of the media is violated and no longer exists. And third is when regular fair elections are also no longer held. So these three are the prerequisites for a working democracy. Regular and free and honest elections, a viable opposition, and free and independent media. Let us guard these three elements in our democracy so that our children and their children's children will enjoy our free way of life in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Ascuna. And last, Justice Carpio.
Thank you, JP. I'll go back to the disqualification case. There are two facts that have been established, and it cannot be denied by anyone. The camp of Bongbong Marcos admitted this. The Comelec stated this in its decision. The second division, everybody agrees to this. First, that Marcos Jr. has been convicted of a crime under the tax code on 4 counts. So he was convicted by final judgment. That's a fact that cannot be denied. 2, that Bongbong Marcos has not served his sentence because his own lawyer said they did not pay the fine to the Quezon City Trial Court. By their own admission, they did not pay the fine. Now, if you are convicted and you have not yet served your sentence, you are called a convict. But if you have served your sentence, you are called an ex-convict. Bongbong Marcos is not an ex-convict. He is still a convict, a certified convict, because the Quezon City Trial Court issued a certification that Marcos Jr. has not paid the fine. So we have a person who is a convict, a certified convict who wants to be president of the Philippines. My question to the Filipino people, do we want a certified convict who has not served his sentence, who admits not having served his sentence? Do you want him to be the president of the Philippines? Thank you.
Ayan. Thank you so much, Justice Carpio. Yan po, sana tanungin natin ang mga tanong ni Justice Carpio sa ating sarili. Kung gusto ba natin maging Pangulo ang isang certified convict. Ayan po, dyan po natin tinatapos ang isa na namang Tapatan Media Forum ng Isang Bayan ngayong araw. Stay tuned po para sa ating mga announcement na ipapalabas po namin sa ating Facebook page. Next week po, ang ating mga guests ay mga doktor naman. Tatalakayin ng ating mga kababayang doktor, no, ang kanilang mga hinaing at mga sitwasyong medikal dito sa ating bansa. Kumusta na nga bang ating mga health workers? Patuloy pa rin ba silang naghihirapan ngayong pandemya? Maraming salamat po sa mga nanood at sana ay makasama namin ulit kayo sa susunod na namang Tapatan. Ito po si Attorney JP Calleja na muling nagbabati na isang mapagpalayang araw sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat po.